All right, guys, so today in front of me from Bardstown Bourbon Company, we have their Bottled and Bond Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. Now, this one is aged 6 years, comes in at 100 proof. Mash bill on this one is 68% corn, 20% wheat, and 12% malted barley. All of those grains being locally sourced. This is 100% estate distilled over at Bardstown Bourbon Company, so everything, again, from the distillation to the aging to the bottling, all done over there at Bardstown. I did review their Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey from the Origin Series and then the Origin Series Rye. So this is the last of the series to review. Definitely excited to get into this one, guys. So without further ado, let's go. All right, guys, so as I stated, this one is 6 years old, comes in at 100 proof, being bottled and bond, and mash bill on this one is being 68% corn, 20% wheat, and then 12% malted barley. Let's go ahead and get in the nose. So one of the things that I noticed when I first poured this, it was a little, it did smell a little hot coming off, but I've let this sit out for 10 minutes now, and with it sitting out, it really opens up to, again, a really nice caramel, really nice vanilla. There's a lot of some like sweet kind of rich honey further into the glass. Further away from the glass, I start to pull out some sweet oak, and then some of those baking spices make themselves present as well. There is like this slight kind of, it's almost like a cinnamon nutmeg kind of coated like wheated bread further away. So you're getting some of that sweet oak, you're getting a little like breadiness, some like wheat bread, and then again like kind of coated in like a cinnamon kind of nutmeg mixture as far as baking spices further away. Further in, again, it's a really nice kind of heavy caramel kind of vanilla there on the nose. And again, some of that ethanol has kind of gone away. When you first pour it, it does come off a little hot, a little ethanol forward. But as it opens up, it really starts to open up again very, very nicely with the caramel and kind of vanilla forward notes. And further away, again, that wheat breadiness, some sweet oak, some kind of cinnamon and nutmeg kind of mixture, like a rub, if you will, on the bread. Yeah, it's almost, again, that honey definitely makes itself present, though, too, further into the glass. It is almost like, it's like a honey wheat bread, caramel, vanilla, and then, like, again, there's that sweet oak that kind of, like, trails off on that back end with some of those baking spices, like a cinnamon nutmeg kind of rub on that honey wheat bread. Really nice nose, guys. Let's get into the palate. Cheers. So one of the things I noticed on this one, it actually drinks a little bit hotter than 100 proof, especially on that first sip. I think that 105, 107 range. But what I like about that is it actually kind of brings out some more of those baking spices, some of that nutmeg, some of that cinnamon there on that mid palate. Front of the palate, again, was very sweet. Again, I kind of get like a little bit of an apricot with some of that honey there on the front of the palate, some sweetness, a little bit of like mild kind of fruit. And then center of the palate is kind of where those baking spices really kind of start to develop. Some of that nutmeg, some of that cinnamon. Now this one actually has a really nice finish to it. Again, medium to long finish, almost on that longer side. But what I like about it is so it starts to transition from the middle to the back of the palate. It starts to get a little more dense with some fruitiness and a little earthiness too as well. So it's not necessarily that grain forward earthiness. It's almost get like almost like a tea note there on the back of the palate before it hits into the finish. Really nice first sip though. Let's get to the second one, guys. Yeah, on that second sip, a lot of that spice kind of died down a little bit. The baking spices. It doesn't drink as proofy on that second sip as it did the first. But what it did is so on the front of the palate, that slight apricot note and then some of that honey are still there. That sweetness, kind of mild fruitiness. But then that really starts to follow through into that mid palate, where it's like a lot of honey, like a honey, like baked kind of bread sitting there on the center of the palate. Again, the baking spices have kind of died down at this point. There's still a little bit of like a cinnamon there. But then the back of the palate, it starts to pull a little bit of oakiness now. It's not a dark, deep, rich oak. It's more along the lines of that sweet oak that it kind of, so you get a little bit of those tannins there. But for me, like the honey really just went now, it like transitioned from the front to the middle to the back of the palate and into the finish. It has a slight, again, a slight tea note, like a little earthy note there on the back and like right before it hits the finish. The finish is actually, it's pretty long finish. Again, medium to long, a little, like right on the border of that long side. And then, again, like there's a little bit of fruitiness going on there. Can't quite pick out what it is onto the back of that palate where like that sweet oak kind of fades off. So it seems like the more that I sip on this, the more kind of fruit forwardness starts to come out and more of those baking spices start to die off. It is very soft on the palate, I will say that. Surprisingly enough, though, I don't get any of like the corn sweetness. I feel like I get more of the wheat influence than I do the corn. And the corn was a 68%, the wheat was 20%. But I do feel that wheat a little bit more than I do the corn. Not grain forward wise, but just like the softness of the palate. It's not as sharp with some of those notes as you would get with like a rye or even a higher corn content. Let's get in the last sip, guys. Cheers. Yeah, so on that last sip, again, it's completely changed. From the very first sip that I took into the last, it does become definitely more fruit forward, but still very soft on the palate. Honey richness still there from the front to the back. It's completely kind of covered the entire palate now from the front to the middle to the back. A lot of like really nice honey, like a honey baked kind of bread. That softness from a wheat. Again, not a lot of corn sweetness. Some of that sweetness I was getting from that honey and that like apricot note there on the front of the palate. And then middle of the palate now is more of that honey and kind of sweet oak. But then there is a little bit more of a fruitiness that's starting to come to life there a little bit. As I started to drink this a little bit more and more. And then again, that sweet oak still there on like the mid to back palate. Kind of pulls those tannins down with that honey. There is still like a little bit of almost like a tea, some kind of earthy note there, like a tea note, right before it gets into the finish. It's got a pretty nice viscosity to it, not as rich and dense as that rye was. Still a pretty nice viscosity to it. However, this has got a pretty nice finish to it. Again, more along that almost that long side of a finish, but. Either way, this is actually a really good bottle and bond offering from Bardstown Bourbon Company. Again, very kind of fruit and baking spice there forward at the beginning, and then again it starts to turn into this like honey richness, sweet oak, and then into the back there's a little bit of like this earthiness, a little bit of like maybe some white pepper. Again, that wheat kind of almost like a honey glazed kind of bread. Regardless, so really good stuff here, guys, from Bardstown Bourbon Company. So I want to thank you guys for tuning into this episode of Dusty Dan's Whiskey Reviews. I want to send a big thank you to the team over at Bardstown Bourbon Company for supplying me with these samples here to review on the channel. Again, guys, after reviewing all three of them are very, very different. One of them having, a rye content that is not bottled and bond, and then their Origin Series rye, which is a 95.5, and then this bottled and bond Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, which has a wheat mash bill instead of the rye. In fact, this Origin Series, again, being 100% estate distilled by Bardstown Bourbon Company, I think they have a lot of different variety now and options to kind of play with. All three of these from the series, again, very good offerings from them, and they're all at a very nice price point as well. So this one, I think, coming in at a $49.99 price point. So for a 6-year bottled and bond weeded Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, I just don't think you can go wrong with that price point. But guys, if you're looking for more reviews like this, hit that subscribe button and bell notification to be alerted of any upcoming reviews or live streams. You also find me on Instagram at Dusty Dan's Whiskey Reviews. Until next time, guys, stay dusty.